There are places in this world where the water doesn't just drown you, it changes you. Black Hollow Cave was one of those places. For years, locals whispered about its depths, warning of disappearances, of divers who went in and never came back the same. Some said the cave was cursed. Others believed something far worse lurked beneath its still, black surface, something ancient, something hungry. Mark didn't believe the stories. He should have. Default text. Since he was a child, Mark had a need to be near water. There was something about the stillness that existed under the surface, the way that the world above ceased to exist, that inspired a sense of liberation inside him. He was an experienced diver who was thorough in his preparations and respectful of the norms that govern the ocean at all times. However, he would soon discover that regulations were designed for locations that were comprehensible to people. Black Hollow Cave was not like any other cave. The cave was notorious among the locals since it was hidden deep into the forest. They told about divers who vanished without a trace, divers who had delved into the water and never returned. According to some, the water in that area was starving. Despite the fact that Mark's friends pleaded with him not to attend, their cautions just served to pique his interest. The cave was off limits and unexplored, which was just the type of challenge that he was looking for. When he looked down, the water was much colder than he had anticipated, and the darkness swallowed the beam of his flashlight almost immediately. It seemed as if something had worn down the walls of the cave over the course of millennia, as they were smooth and abnormally smooth. As the pressure in his ears increased, he continued to swim deeper until he reached a channel that was quite small. After then, he became aware of it, which was just the type of challenge that he was looking for. When he looked down, the water was much colder than he had anticipated, and the darkness swallowed the beam of his flashlight almost immediately. It seemed as if something had worn down the walls of the cave over the course of millennia, as they were smooth and abnormally smooth. As the pressure in his ears increased, he continued to swim deeper until he reached a channel that was quite small. After then, he became aware of it. There was a movement in the walls. Being alive and conscious, the water surged all about him. After that, nothing happened. Neither of Mark's parents had any hope left. The police had spent weeks searching the cave's depths, but they had not discovered any traces of a person or any pieces of equipment. According to the official report, he was indicated as missing, presumed dead. In the meanwhile, a hiker in the vicinity of Black Hollow called 911 on a rainy night in October. As he crawled out of the cave's mouth, he saw a guy who was nude, and his skin was bleached white to the point that it looked like bone. Mark had hardly been recognized by the authorities when they arrived. He had dark eyes that lacked pupils, much like a monster that lives in the ocean. Each of his fingers had a webbed appearance, and his nails had become ragged and jagged. Although he was breathing, there was no movement in his chest. In addition, his voice was not correct when he talked. In a low voice, he murmured, "It's still in there, the time has come for it. For such a long time, it has been waiting." According to Mark, he had not been the only one in the cave. There was something that had been with him, something that was very old and something that did not belong in this world. He was remade and changed as a result of it, which had kept him alive. As he rasped, "It showed me things," he said. "Cities buried under the waves, creatures that are slumbering in the shadows. What it wants to do is rouse them." The medical professionals referred to it as psychosis. The authorities referred to it as a miracle. On the other hand, some who gazed into Mark's eyes for an excessive amount of time claimed to have seen something there. After that, Mark disappeared once again throughout the night. When his hospital room was discovered, it was vacant, the window was open, and there was a strong smell of seawater in the air. Is it the very last thing he left behind? The wall was covered with a single word that was written in a dark and moist substance, DOW, and additionally, if you pay great attention to the area around Black Hollow Cave on nights when there is little to no noise, you may still hear it the sound of something moving in the water. We are waiting, feeling hungry, dialing in. The first corpses were discovered 3 months after Mark initially disappeared from the hospital where he was being treated. When fishermen at Black Hollow Lake took up their nets, they discovered that they had been ripped apart, with the steel cables shredded as if they had been destroyed by something with teeth that were far stronger than any fish. Then followed the drownings, which consisted of swimmers going missing in water that was just a few inches deep, and their bodies were never found. The few people who managed to live recounted tales that were nonsensical about entities that were hidden under the surface. These accounts described long, pale figures that glided just out of sight and hands that gripped but had an excessive number of digits. The police made an effort to maintain silence, but rumors began to circulate. After then, the recordings started to come to light. A group of experienced cave divers was sent to Black Hollow in order to conduct an investigation after sonar readings revealed the presence of an artificial cavern structure located deep below the lake. There were weird engravings on the walls that seemed to be older than human civilization, and their cameras filmed the drop, which included the tunnels that were becoming narrower, and then there was the shrieking. The video indicated that one of the divers abruptly wrenched backward, and his regulator was torn out of his mouth by an invisible force during the time when something swift was moving just outside the reach of the light. The water became bloody before finally landing on the cave floor. The camera belonging to the last diver continued to capture as it spun crazily. There was nothing to be heard for a period of 10 minutes. After then, a face appeared in the frame. Mark, or what was remained of him, was the one it was. In addition to being stretched excessively tightly over bones that seemed to bend in the wrong direction, his skin had become a horrible gray color. His lips opened, and a sound came out that was not speech. It was not a scream, but rather it was a deep, droning hum that caused the audio equipment to distort in a manner that was not natural. One remark was said in a hushed tone as the video came to a close. "It's coming up. For the purpose of analyzing the water samples taken from Black Hollow, a marine scientist by the name of Dr. Elena Vasquez was brought in. What she discovered was completely illogical. The chemistry of the lake was not correct. The degrees of salt were very unpredictable, giving the impression that the water was not totally from this planet. To make matters even worse, the sand included microfossils of creatures that did not correspond to any known species. Some of these organisms were so peculiar that they seemed to belong to an entirely new evolutionary tree. Afterward, the earthquakes began to occur. Initial tremors were mild, but they became more severe. There was little evidence that the area was prone to tectonic activity, which left seismologists perplexed. However, the natives had a greater understanding. In their conversation, they discussed the ancient myths, the deity that the original settlers had dreaded so much that they had hidden away, and the creature that slept under the lake. It was now being roused from its sleep by something. The electricity in the surrounding town was rendered inoperable on the evening of the most severe earthquake. Those who were courageous enough to glance toward the lake claimed to have seen figures moving in the water towards the beach. These shapes were not swimming, but rather strolling. And Mark was the one who was at the heart of it all. His body was contorted, his limbs were excessively lengthy, and his mouth was stretched out in a smile that reached from ear to ear across his face. He stood at the edge of the ocean. The surface of the lake bubbled behind him, giving the impression that something enormous was emerging from the depths. The sheriff's deputy who was sent to investigate finally sent out a radio signal, which consisted of a distorted screech followed by noises of wet crunching. It was then laughing. It was decided to call in the National Guard. The lake has been designated as a restricted area. However, it was already too late to act, mostly due to the fact that whatever was in Black Hollow was no longer just sitting in the water. In the pipes, it was found. There were reports of people experiencing a dark, oily liquid that was flowing out of their faucets, showers, and toilets. Some people who touched it described it as being warm, as if it were live flesh. And then the dreams began, images of a great metropolis that had been submerged in water, of structures that were constructed at angles that were painful to the eyes, and of something enormous moving in the shadows. The same message was always spoken in the ears of people who were sleeping and never changed. Your kid is on our team. Have a look around. One evening, Mark's parents, who were shattered by their loss, disappeared. The doors of their vehicle were left open when it was discovered parked on the outskirts of Black Hollow. One could follow footprints into the water, but none of them returned. The settlement was surrounded by the government seal. According to official descriptions, there was a chemical leak. Relocation was performed on the few survivors, and their memories were adjusted. On the other hand, if you go there right now and stand on the edge of Black Hollow Lake on a night when there is no moon there, you will be able to hear it, the humming that is just below the surface. Additionally, if you are so naive as to gaze into the water, you will be able to see them. These are the faces, the ones who vanished without a trace. They may be found waiting down there. Moreover, they won't be alone themselves for very, very long. Around Black Hollow Lake, there was a military roadblock that was designed to prevent civilians from entering. It did not prevent anything from entering the building. It was the fish that began it all. It was stated that local fishermen kilometers downstream caught strange hybrids, such as trout with an excessive number of eyes and catfish with teeth that were jagged and human-like. And then the dogs arrived. They would disappear throughout the night, only to reappear a few days later, their fur falling off in wet clumps, and their whimpers sounded strangely like speech. But the true terror occurred when those who had been missing started showing up again. In addition to Mark, indeed, not just his parents, every one of them, every single diver, every single swimmer, and every single investigator who had ever vanished in the vicinity of Black Hollow started getting out of the lake during the night. Their bodies were not what they should have been. They had enlarged limbs, bloated mouths, and skin that was mottled and shimmering like something that had just been born from the depths. They did not give a word. They made a humming sound. From that point on, the suicides began. It was discovered that the lungs of the victims were filled with brackish fluid, even though they had died a great distance away from any source of water. The autopsies found something even more disturbing. The stomachs of the deceased contained creatures that should not have been there. These organisms were little, pulsing polyps that, when exposed to air, disintegrated into a dark sludge. For the broadcast. Before the authorities erased it, the last message from the military station at Black Hollow was made public on the internet. In the surveillance clip, troops were seen shooting into the lake as the water was bulging in an abnormal manner. After then, the cameras were able to capture it. A massive, gelatinous mass emerging from the depths, its surface adorned with an infinite number of human faces, all of which were whispering in unison. The final words that were understandable before the transmission became static. Fingloi Maglonov Cthulhu, as a result of your knowledge, you are reading this. It's possible that you've heard the buzzing sound coming from your pipes at 3 in the morning. It's possible that you've seen how your reflection might become stuck in calm water for an excessive amount of time. It is coming to pass. And when they do, you will be forced to make a decision. When you shut your eyes, do you hope that everything is only in your head? Alternately, do you go into the body of water that is closest also? Would you want to join the choir?